Hey everybody, this is Brady, also known as the War Hamster, co-hosting another episode of the Re-Federalist Report, and joining me today, finally again, is my very good friend, constitutional mentor, Mr. Constitution, Douglas V. Gibbs.
Thanks for having me as always. Between a couple of trips, a couple of illnesses, one on my side, one on yours, we finally, well, I don't know if yours was an illness as much as a procedure, but
yeah, little dental emergency.
Mm-hmm.
I had a chipmunk cheek there for a few days, and it was not.
Doesn't work well with video.
Yeah, it would not have been good, and I did not want it memorialized in any way, shape, or form. We are here today on Saturday, November the 22nd, 2025, to continue our series in our review of James Madison's notes of the 1787 Philadelphia Constitutional Convention. And it has been 30 days since, I just looked, it's been 30 days since we got together and did this, thanks to all your travels. Wow. Yeah, which is the longest gap I think we've ever done. So we'll try to...
I'm good until April now.
I can't promise the same, but I'll do the best I can. These are going to be crazy holidays too. So, anyway, let's jump into it. When we, well, unless you have anything else, tell the audience why we're reviewing Madison's notes again.
Well, as a constitutionalist, and when I say constitutionalist, I mean an originalist, not a textualist, not somebody who believes that it could be broadly interpreted. But as an originalist, the most important thing when it comes to understanding the context of the original intent is original documents. Or what better original document to go over than the debate notes, basically the minutes of this convention. Now, the minutes technically were kept by Mr. Jackson, the secretary, but James Madison, who created the structure with the Virginia plan of the Constitution, kept the most copious notes of all of them. And that's what we're doing. We're going line by line through those notes so that we can better understand what these guys meant when they wrote the words that we see in today's United States Constitution.
Yeah, and there's so much value in this. I knew the Constitution pretty well before I knew Doug, and I was always kind of original intent guy. I've always been a Jeffersonian. But the deeper, with Doug's inspiration, I've gotten a lot deeper into my homework over the last 4 or 5 years. And when these current day political events come up, especially Supreme Court cases or debates in Congress, etc., this information we're giving out here arms you so well to actually know what is true and what is absolute horseshit. And most of it's the latter of the two. And it's really
and let me add, it was Madison's notes that really brought me out of an academic understanding of the Constitution and really helped me along my road to becoming a better originalist.
Well, today should be a really, really fun one. I'm going to jump into the screen share. So for people who haven't watched before, this is the calendar of the Philadelphia Convention. They started in May and they would go all the way through September in Philadelphia.
At a wonderful place called the Avalon Project.
Oh, yeah, that's the website, yes. We last left off on June 19th, and James Madison had basically spent the entire last episode speaking about a lot of things. Go watch the last episode. I'm not going to review the whole thing, but we left off right here. And what they're going to do is they're going to review the resolutions that they've kind of agreed upon. Now, nothing's written in stone yet. As we go through these, and we're going to go real quick because I want to get to the meat of today's show. But just to give you an idea of where we are right now, this is an unfinished product at this point in time. So real quickly, these are all the resolutions. Resolved, you should have 3 branches of government. Resolve the national legislature, Congress, should be 2 branches. First branch should be elected by the people for a term of 3 years. Again, unfinished product. They also talked about how...
And let me stop you for just a second. So on number 2, it says the national legislature ought to consist of 2 branches. This is an important revelation because we have to remember the Continental Congress, all of their legislatures that they have had up to this point have been unicameral legislatures, one chamber. This idea of having 2 chambers is very important. And what we'll learn as time goes is it's an important part of what became known as checks and balances. Please continue.
No, I want to hammer that point home because I think it's one of the most important issues we're facing today.
Mhm.
And if you want to really get into detail on this, Doug and I did a great video. If you go into Rumble, type war, hamster, and then Reynolds versus V. Sims. It's a fantastic court case, or not fantastic, it's a terrible court case. The whole idea of having the two branches is you want to protect the big states from the small and the small states from the big. If it's one vote per state, big Virginia can get bullied around by the small states. If you do it population based, Virginia can bully the small states because they were the biggest state by population. So what they did is they came up with a balance, and balance is really important because you get compromise. And
it's also an attempt to balance the distribution of power between the heavily populated, not just states, but areas, cities, and the rural areas. So when you have democracy, and remember, they don't like democracy, but there are some democratic functions in our system, House of Representatives being a good example. But whenever you have democracy, the population centers, the cities, they control the vote because that's where the numbers are. And so how do you offset that power? Well, you need the rural voice to have a voice. Well, how can they have a voice in a democratic system when they don't have the numbers? And so when you make things even, like 2 per state when it comes to the Senate, and the fact that at the time they were to be appointed by the state legislatures, 1 senator per legislature, and the state senates were dominated by the rural areas, and some of the state houses were rural dominated. This made sure that the U.S. Senate was the rural voice. You got the city voice in the House, the rural voice in the Senate. So it's not just big state, small state, but it's populated areas, rural areas. And let's create a natural check.
Very good. So I'm glad you interrupted because that's a really important point. And I've been hammering home that Reynolds v. Sims concept. And you guys will be hearing me talk about this a lot over the next year. So it's an important topic. Next one is the second branch of the legislature to be chosen by the individual legislatures, which is actually what will end up being the case. So at this point, they've got the Senate defined. They resolve that each branch ought to possess the right of originating acts. National legislature ought to be empowered to enjoy the rights.
Now, when they're saying each branch, they're talking about the chambers of Congress, folks, not the branches of government.
Yeah, House and Senate.
Yeah.
Empowered to enjoy the legislative rights vested in Congress, Confederation, moreover, to legislate in all cases to which the separate states are incompetent. They're talking about where the federal government has power and where the states have power.
Mm-hmm.
Right of suffrage of the first branch national legislature ought not to be according to the rule established in the Articles of Confederation, but according to some equitable ratio of representation. And they're going to talk about a whole number of white and other free citizens and inhabitants who's eligible. That's where they get the 3/5 clauses right here.
And notice the part there where it says except Indians, not paying taxes in each state. What this was saying was, while these people were born in the United States or not, they reside in the United States, they are actually inside the borders of the United States, their allegiance is to their tribes. They don't have allegiance to the United States. So therefore, they're not going to be counted towards apportionment. And for those of you who are very intuitive, you know what I'm saying. Illegal aliens, like these Indians, born and residing, or residing and their children born in the United States, but their allegiance is elsewhere, they should not be counted towards apportionment, just like the quote-unquote Indians not taxed.
And we're going to get Supreme Court ruling on birthright citizenship pretty soon. I got a gut feeling, Doug, they're going to get that right. Or mostly
I'm hoping they get it right. I really am.
I think it's going to be mostly right. If they do, what'll be interesting is what happens next. Do you go after it retroactively? And if we had a Republican Party with any spine, I would say, yes, that's going to happen. But this Republican Party is in Congress, I'm talking about more than anything, is really disappointing me. So we'll see what happens.
Not compared to the Republican Party of past. It's better. Not where I want it, but it's better. The old neocon establishment, old guard, was basically just the same thing as their opponents, just a slower march toward it. I really do feel like the Republican Party has been remade by this current president, but that's not the topic for today. Let's get back to.
Yeah, we'll do a whole show on that because I'm going to argue with you on that one because if that were the case, they would have codified at least some of Trump's executive orders, and that has not been done. I don't see any difference to me. I think it's lip service, and I'm really disgusted right now. But we'll do another show on that.
Okay. Wow, War Hamster and Mr. Constitution ready to go head to head on something interesting.
Well, that's
definitely need to be paying attention for this one.
Well, no, because Doug and I agree on about 98% of this stuff, but it's that 2% where we disagree. That's where the magic is made. And we've both changed each other's minds on a few things over the years. So if you and I disagree on something, buckle up your seatbelts because it's going to be a fun conversation.
And sometimes not necessarily change of mind, sometimes an adjustment of opinion. So, but maybe move a little closer to the other person, but not completely. So it depends. But anyway,
we'll be debating the definition of left versus right until we both, are poking up daisies. But we're really close on it. It's just it's almost a matter of semantics on that one. But
yeah.
All right, national executive. That's creating the executive branch. Single person chosen by the national legislature. This is very important. They have not figured out how to elect a president yet. Right now, they say they want the Congress to choose the president from among their own ranks.
And they're looking at a term of 7 years at this point.
Yeah, which is interesting.
Except for Hamilton. He's calling for lifetime, but
Yeah, he just did that 2 shows ago.
Yeah.
I want an elected king. And I'll be right next to that king, coincidentally. Resolve the national executive have the right to negative any legislative act. This is
when they say any, they mean any at this point.
Yeah. This is really interesting. This is a very important point. Does the federal government have a negative over state law?
Well, and does the president have the authority to negative a legislative act? Because, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but it's important. In the Constitution, it says he shall faithfully execute the laws of the Union. He does not have the authority to interpret and negative a legislative act. So they actually did go against this eventually. The president, and I've gotten in arguments with people about this because it frustrates them. They say, well, no, if it's unconstitutional, the president should be allowed. No, that's not what it says. He's to execute the laws. He's not there to broadly interpret. If you have a president that has the authority to interpret, you've got a big problem if you have the wrong person in office.
Yeah, this is the veto, and it talks about you can override the veto with 2/3. So right now, this is pretty close to what we got. National judiciaries, creating these federal courts. Judges be appointed by the second branch of the legislature, that's the Senate, to hold their office during good behavior. Important point. How do you define good behavior? If we rewrite the Constitution, we may want to define good behavior a little bit better.
Well, unfortunately, in today's vernacular, bad behavior is breaking the law, and that's it. Acting unconstitutionally isn't, and that's part of our problem.
Yeah, that's like I said, it needs to be redefined. Resolve that the national legislature be empowered to appoint the inferior tribunals. Those are the district courts. 13, resolve that the jurisdiction of the national judiciary shall extend to cases which respect the collection of the national revenue. Impeachments of any national officers and questions which involve the national peace and harmony. Those are the power of, what are the Article 3 powers of the court, which of course we've blown away over the last 200 plus years.
And it sounds like they're inching towards external issues, basically, that what would become the federal powers, which is external issues and disputes between the states.
14 is how do we add new states. 15 is the provision ought to be made for the continuance of Congress and their authorities until a given day after the reform of the Union. This is, the current Confederate Congress is still in power until this is ratified, whatever this becomes.
And understand, at this point, we still have a lot of the delegates under the illusion that they're still trying to fix the Articles of Confederation, but we're fast approaching the moment where the realization that a new constitution is being written is being realized. And You're going to
Yeah,
see some people leave.
Yeah, some of these people are still saying, we don't have the power to create this new constitution, because ostensibly they gathered in Philadelphia just to amend, not to recreate. All right, 16 is my favorite. Resolved that a Republican Constitution and its existing laws ought to be guaranteed to each state by the United States. This would become Article 4, Section 4, my favorite part of the Constitution.
Well, now that makes one think. Not that I'm naming any particular persons or movements in our country. So if in a city or a county or a state, there is any movement towards a type of government system or ideology that is not in line with our American Republican system, well, then it would be unconstitutional. And if it's being guaranteed by the United States, then that tells us that the federal government can do something about it.
Yeah, it's a great point. Again, we will be hammering this home all year long when we talk about Reynolds v. Sims. All year long. In fact, this is my number one talking point this year, and next, and probably until this gets fixed. Resolved that a provision ought to be made for the amendment of the Articles of the Union whenever it shall seem necessary. That's what they're doing here. One of the problems here, people, is to amend the Articles of Confederation, it took unanimous. All 13 states had to agree. And Rhode Island had the tendency to not agree to anything. Because they were pirates and smugglers. Resolved that the legislative, executive, and judiciary powers within the several states ought to be bound by oath to support the Articles of Union. And 19, that the amendments which shall be offered to the Confederation by the Convention ought at a proper time or times after the approbation of Congress to be submitted to an assembly or assemblies of representatives recommended by the several legislatures to be expressly chosen by the people to consider and decide thereon. How are we going to ratify these amendments that we're going to propose? And it says it goes back to the people or the legislatures, or recommended by the legislatures and then chosen by the legislatures that have been chosen by the people. I think they're discussing a convention. All right. So that's where we're at after several weeks. And not all of that is going to, make it through to the end product.
So now, real quick, the next part says Mr. Randolph's plan, for those of you who have not been with us or you have not watched the other videos, Mr. Randolph's plan is actually Mr. Madison's plan, the Virginia plan. But Madison, being the kind of guy he was, he didn't want to necessarily point all to himself. And so he gave the plan to Randolph, Edmund Randolph, and asked him to present it to the convention early on. Now we're talking weeks and weeks ago at this point in our study.
All right. We start with Mr. James Wilson of Pennsylvania. He observed that by a national government, he did not mean that one that would swallow up the state governments.
Stop there. So in other words, what he's saying is, while we're calling it a national government, we don't want a national government. We want something else. National governments swallow up the smaller governments, control it. This one big giant umbrella that controls everything. We don't want that. The states hanging on to their sovereignty, because the United States, got to realize, developed very differently than any other country in the world. Each of the colonies with their own personality, their own customs, their own ways. And so the idea is we don't want a national government, an overpowering government like the rest of the world has. This has got to be something different. This has got to be something that does not swallow up the states. Go ahead.
Yeah, and if they would have created a national government in the Constitution, it would not have been ratified. It would.
Yeah, the states would have never accepted it. They're
not going to give away that kind of power, and that's really one of the biggest. And obviously, we know what happened. Lincoln came along and said, "What Constitution?"
And Wilson here says, "As seemed to be wished by some gentlemen."
Yes.
When you read John Taylor of Caroline's book, A New View of the Constitution of the United States, which was published in 1823, in the very beginning, the very first chapter of the book, he explains that all of the delegates went in as as nationalists. They wanted a large central government. Through the first few weeks here, many of them went, you know what? That's not going to work. but some of them are holding out. That's what he means by as seemed to be wished by some gentlemen. You understand, they all were big government minded when they went in. Some maybe less than others.
I wouldn't say all, Doug. I would
Absolutely.
say well, you have the New Yorkers who left when they started going that direction. So, hey, we'll get there.
You talk about John Lansing and Robert Yates.
Yeah, I just don't like the word all because it's we'll get there.
I think they're all nationalists, maybe in different varying degrees, but they all were, I think, nationalists. But go ahead.
All right, it's talking about Mr. Wilson. This is Madison writing. Said he was tenacious of the idea of preserving the latter, meaning the states. He thought, contrary to the opinion of Colonel Hamilton, that they might not only subsist, but subsist on friendly terms with the former. We can get along separate. They were absolutely necessary for certain purposes which the former could not reach. Talking about local government. All large governments must be subdivided into lesser jurisdictions. As examples, he mentioned Persia, Rome, and particularly the divisions and subdivisions of England by Alfred.
King Alfred, by the way, is one of my favorite kings. He was a Saxon king, the education king. But anyway, continue, please.
What time period was Alfred? Do you remember?
Excuse me. It was, I don't remember the years, but he was the one that really began the push back against the Vikings, and where the Saxons pretty much regained control of England. I don't remember the exact years, but it was the tail end, the tail end of the Viking control of Britain, or England, should I say?
That's interesting. We just recently watched that series Vikings, which is outstanding and pretty close to historically accurate.
Pretty brutal people, man. Of course, when you live up in the north where it's hard to live, you got to be.
That's an interesting way to make a living, taking, instead of building, just taking. But all right, here's our favorite anti-hero, Alexander Hamilton, comes in.
Now, I want to say something quick. So Wilson is like, contrary to the opinion of Colonel Hamilton, but later on in the political scheme of things, he starts leaning towards the Federalist Party and kind of towards Hamilton on some nationalist ideas. So this is interesting that right now, and don't get me wrong, I love James Wilson. He was probably the most ardent defenders of the Constitution during the New York Convention, the Pennsylvania Convention. Yeah. But it's interesting how right now he's kind of going head to head with Hamilton, but later on he would lean in his direction a little bit. So anyway, continue, please.
All right, here's Hamilton. I feel like I got to put on like a villain hat when I'm reading Hamilton. Colonel Hamilton coincided with the proposition as it stood in the report. He had not been understood yesterday. By an abolition of the states, he meant that no boundary could be drawn between the national and state legislatures. That's not what he said. That the former must therefore have indefinite authority. If it were limited at all, the rivalship of the states would gradually subvert it. Even as corporations, the extent of some of them, as Virginia, Massachusetts, etc., would be formidable. He's talking about the rivalry.
Almost sounds like the radical Republicans in Lincoln later on in history. Yeah. Almost.
One wonders. As states, he thought they ought to be abolished. I'll just leave that hanging there for a second. This is where Hamilton.
He just contradicted himself, by the way.
Yeah, he did.
There in the same speech.
But he admitted the necessity of leaving in them subordinate jurisdictions.
So in other words, get rid of the states, but hey, okay, we'll keep the counties.
The examples of Persia and the Roman Empire cited by Mr. Wilson, where he thought in favor of his doctrine, the great powers delegated to the satraps and proconsuls, having frequently produced revolts and schemes of independence. This is Hamilton the nationalist. The guy who wants a king. Get rid of the states. There will be no state rights.
States are going to be like petulant children that you can't control because you give them too much leeway, too many powers, too much ability to be petulant children, to be rebellious. So just clamp down, put an iron fist on them. Don't even allow them to have their own state jurisdictions, and they're good. Then we'll survive. That's what he's
kind
saying.
of what he wanted is what we ended up we have today almost.
Yeah.
All right, next guy who's going to speak is Mr. Rufus King, and we want to jump into his bio real quick. So I'm going to switch over to here, if I could.
Rufus King is an interesting guy. He's a man of two states, New York and Massachusetts.
Hang on, my screen share is doing something funky. All right. Usually I could switch on the fly. Okay, now we'll get to Mr. Rufus King. That's the wrong one. Let's do this one. Here's his Wikipedia entry. Are you seeing the Wikipedia?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. I had the Grokpedia one up there, but that's a little bit harder to read. Born in 1755, the founding father, lawyer, politician, diplomat from Massachusetts. After formation of the new Congress, he then represented New York in the United States Senate.
Like I said, a man of two states.
Yes. He emerged as a leading member of the Federalist Party and was the party's last presidential nominee during the 1816 presidential election. The son of a prosperous Massachusetts merchant, studied law before the war, gets into the Massachusetts General Court, and 1793 he's into the Congress of the Confederation. At the 17th Philadelphia Convention, he emerged as a leading nationalist and called for increased powers for the federal government. So he's going to agree with Hamilton with what he says next. After the convention, he returns to Massachusetts, where he helped use his influence to help ratify the Constitution. And then at Hamilton's urging, he abandons his law practice and moves to New York City.
Let's stop there for a second. See, Massachusetts was the home of these nationalist ideas. Massachusetts was probably the biggest ally of the Federalist Party while it existed. So, from Hamilton's point of view, Massachusetts didn't need Mr. King, but New York did. There were an awful lot of anti-federalists in New York. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a really important point. And if you really go into the history, there's a group of people, the ruling families, the elites of Boston were called the Boston Brahmins. And they were merchants that made their money in international trade. They wanted control of a national government. They wanted taxes to help internal improvements.
They wanted an American version of mercantilism.
Exactly. They didn't want tax dollars to create canals so their shipping can go inland, to use the inland waterways. They needed a national government so they could line their own pockets. This is crony capitalism. That's who these people are. That's who the Federalists were. That's who the Lincolnians were. Wins election to represent New York in the U.S. Senate in 1789 and stayed in office until 1796. That year, he accepted Washington's appointment to the position of Minister to Great Britain. All right. So King aligned with Hamilton's Federalist Party. The Democratic Republican President Thomas Jefferson retained his services after Jefferson's victory in the 1800 election. Something very interesting is going on while he is the American representative in England. In 1798, the big battle domestically was, do we side with France or do we, which is what the Jeffersonians would have done, or do we side with England, which the Hamiltonians wanted to do?
And John Adams called for neutrality, but he leaned towards Britain.
Oh, without a doubt. And again, Adams is from Massachusetts. So King plays a very important role in that. That's where we got the Alien Sedition Act of 1798. He served as a Federalist vice presidential candidate twice. Unsuccessful ticket with Pinckney of South Carolina, which is interesting because Pinckney from small state South Carolina wasn't necessarily a Federalist at this convention in some ways. He runs again in 1812 unsuccessfully. 1813, he goes back to the Senate and stays there till 1825. 1825, he gets sent back to England by John Quincy Adams, but had to come home to ill health. So skipping down, there's a couple other interesting points here. He was on a bunch of committees at this Philadelphia convention. So King's an important voice. A couple more things I wanted to go over with him. 18th War of 1812, the unpopular war. The Federalists tried to regain their reputation. King led an effort at the Federalist Party caucus to nominate a ticket for the presidential election, but failed. The Federalists had been wiped out at this point. He only got 39.
And what began that downward spiral was when Jefferson took office and he fired the Federalist Party half of the bureaucracy. And I've been saying for many years, the way to stop an ideology and a movement that has entrenched itself in the United States is to begin with bureaucracy.
Yeah, well, that's sort of
where the real power is.
Yeah, well, absolutely. We're seeing it today. The technocratic bureaucracy that we live under today. Washington, D.C. votes 96% Democrat. That tells you all you need to know.
Yeah, Jefferson fired the Federalist Party half of the bureaucracy, and within 2 decades, they were gone.
Here's the important part. The Federalist Party had already ceased to exist on the federal stage. During King's second tenure in the Senate, he continued his career as an opponent to slavery, which he denounced as anathema to the principles underlying the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. In what is considered the greatest speech of his career, he spoke against admitting Missouri as a slave state in 1820. That is one thing we've got to give the Federalists credit for, is they were on the right side of the slavery debate.
Right.
Fast forward that to the American quote-unquote Civil War, and people of similar ideology were anti-slavery as well, but not quite as purely of intent. You'll find that a lot of them, like the free soil people, which came from the same mindset, they didn't want soil free of slaves. They wanted soil free of blacks. They were very racist. Make no mistake about that. This is not a purely ethical position. And of course, they would then implement the entire robber baron system, where they got immigrant labor, which is actually cheaper than slave labor, but that's a different conversation. He's at the court of St. James. He's outspoken against the Irish. He did not want Irish immigration. I certainly do not think they will be a desirable acquisition to any nation, but in none would they be likely to prove more mischievous than in mine, where from the sameness of language and similarity of laws and institutions, they have greater opportunities of propagating their principles than in any other country. So he hates the Irish.
And the Irish were hated. You got to remember that I'm trying to remember the exact number. I think it was 98.7% of the United States was Protestant at the time. And the Protestants, English, where were the Catholics? Ireland. But we also have to look at, and I'm looking historically, so those of you who are my Catholic Christian brethren, please don't misunderstand me. I'm looking at history here. When it came to history, the Roman Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire took a very nationalistic, oligarchical look at how to control things. The Protestants aligned more with the barbarians to the north, like the Saxons, limited government. And so it wasn't just the fear of the Irish because they were Irish and they opposed the British or the English, or that it was just a difference of religious opinion. There was an ideological difference. The line between big government-minded Roman Catholic thinking and small government-minded barbarian to the north thinking, that line exists today in the Western Hemisphere. It's the Mexican-American border. Everything to the south aligns with that same oligarchical thinking that came from long ago with the Holy Roman Empire. And so this is why people like King were so against the Irish. I'm not condoning it. I'm explaining that there is a real ideological contrast here more than just religion.
That's a really good point. We can go pretty deep into that another time.
Oh, yeah.
So I would like to go down that road. The other thing I thought was fascinating about King is that his father was a loyalist in the Revolutionary War. But all of his father's sons, including Rufus, were patriots. So he's an interesting guy. So let's see what he has to say today. Shall we?
We shall. And he's speaking right after Hamilton.
Uh-huh.
So it's almost like he's going, oh, by the way, my guy, here's what I got to say about my guy.
So Mr. King wished, as everything depended on this proposition, that no objections might be improperly indulged against the phraseology of it. All right. I have no idea what he's saying there. He conceived that the import of the term states, sovereignty, national, federal had been often used and applied in the discussions inaccurately and delusively. He says, the states were not sovereigns in the sense contended for by some.
Stop
there. Right there. Yes.
Both of us. All right. So I'll let you speak first, but I'll say one thing. Well, holy cow. All right, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. King, and tell the states they're not sovereign, and good luck passing whatever you're going to try to pass.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole idea of how the United States, these colonies developed, was all about their differences, their sovereignty, their uniqueness from each other. This is the whole kit and caboodle of what it was all about. And yes. And so, number one, you've got to be a pretty hardcore nationalist-minded person to want to try to buck that.
Yeah, the whole thing they had in the Union was really, we want to have self-determination, and we're going to join this Union because alone we'd get crushed by Europe, but together we can stand against it, just like we did in the war. Right. That's the fundamental issue. We get to keep our own idea, our own identities, but we have a union for our own common benefit. That's it.
Right.
They did not possess the peculiar features of sovereignty. They could not make war, nor peace, nor alliances, nor treaties.
Actually, they were at the time, but that's beside the point.
That is the point. It's not beside the point.
Because ultimately they would not be able to do those things, but not because they don't have sovereignty, but because those powers would be given to the central or federal government, because they would, for the purpose of a united voice, be more efficient in doing that.
That's what I mean. This is the fundamental point. They were sovereign. They had all the powers of every sovereign entity, and by joining the Union, they granted specific enumerated powers to this new federal government, because the federal government could do some things more efficiently than individual states. And most of that was handling foreign policy, defense, and settling disputes between the states. And that was it. That was it.
And like Hamilton, he's looking at the states like they're petulant children that might get out of control.
Yeah. But I mean, this is the entire point of what the Constitution was supposed to be and how we screwed it up.
Right.
That right there, that sentence is everything. Considering them as political beings, they were dumb, for they could not speak to any foreign sovereign whatever. They were deaf, for they could not hear any propositions from such a sovereign. They had not even the organs or faculties of defense or offense, for they could not of themselves raise troops or equip vessels for war. What just happened in the Revolutionary War? Did they not just do exactly that? Great offense and defense? On the other side, if the Union of the States comprises the idea of a confederation, it comprises that also of consolidation. A union of states is a union of the men composing them, from whence a national character results to the whole. National character. So they basically are saying the people in South Carolina and the people in Rhode Island are going to have this exact same wants, needs, and desires.
And to that, the people from Rhode Island said, "Arr!" No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's true. Congress can act alone without the states, they can act, and their acts will be binding against the instructions of the states. If they declare war, war is de jure declared. Captures made in pursuance of it are lawful. No acts of the states can vary the situation or prevent the judicial consequences. We talk a little bit, and our friend Ron Partain is actually working on a project to rewrite the Constitution in modern day terms. If we were to do so, one of the issues I'd like to add as an amendment to the Constitution is the states actually should have the power to vary that situation. And I wouldn't mind seeing a state-led constitutional court to actually rule, as opposed to using nullification or secession. We should have a constitutional court to rule, the states to rule on any legislation Congress passes. And that constitutional court should have its loyalty to the states and states' rights alone. And I think that would prevent a lot of mischief. But he's sitting there saying states are totally powerless. Ratify what we're going to do here.
And they're the ones guilty of potential mischief.
If the states therefore retained some portion of their sovereignty, they had certainly divested themselves of essential portions of it. If they formed a confederacy in some respects, they formed a nation in others. The convention could clearly deliberate on and propose any alterations that Congress could have done under ye federal authorities or ye federal articles, and could not Congress propose by virtue of the last article a change in any article whatever, and as well that relating on the equality of suffrage as any other. Here's the problem here. If you want to make a change to the Articles of Confederation of the Constitution, it has to be ratified by who, Doug?
The states.
Oh, so they do still have sovereignty.
They're members. They are the members of the contract. They are the parties to the contract.
All right, go ahead and give your parent. Who's the parent? Who's the child?
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. As I like to tell my classes, he's going back to the Constitution classes I used to give in Southern California. And the states created the federal government. The federal government was not in existence when this convention was being held. It was created through this. Created by whom? By these delegates from the states, representing the states. And so the states came first. The states created the federal government. So that makes them the parents. And, as a parent, we don't let our kids run a roughshod over everything. Your son doesn't just grab the keys, or he's not supposed to anyway, and then take off in the car. He's supposed to ask, right?
Yeah,
and the states are those parents. That's the reason why it still takes today the states to ratify amendments, because it is the federal government asking the states for permission for an additional power or a change to the Constitution.
Another way we explain this is what's called the compact theory. This Constitution is a contract between originally 13 parties.
Mm-hmm. And
as long as the contract's, being upheld, all parties, signatories are obligated to obey it, the terms of the contract. But you can always withdraw from a contract if terms are being broken.
Right.
If that's the case, this federal government does not have the power. And the very fact that Article 5 was written, which basically means the states can change the Constitution anytime they want, and much less abolish the entire federal government, means that they have the power and not the federal government.
And he's talking through Article 5 convention.
Yes.
You'll notice when it comes to an Article 5 convention, the states hold the convention, the states propose the amendments, the states ratify the amendments. Congress and the president and the federal government has no part of it. The states can, without the federal government even having a single wisp. The only role that Congress has in Article 5 convention is to call it, and there is a legitimate argument out there right there that by not calling it, the federal government's violating the 9th Amendment, and therefore can be called by the states.
And the reason we've never had a convention of states is every single time there's an amendment that seems like it's going to pass, Congress jumps in there, passes the amendment themselves, and sends it to the states, because the last thing they want is to give up the federal power, let the states actually talk. Because once they meet, they can scale back a lot more.
Yeah. Well, we live in Hamilton's America, and we have a bunch of Rufus Kings in office.
Uh-huh. He made these remarks to obviate some scruples which had been expressed. He doubted very much the practicability of annihilating the states, but thought that much of their power ought to be taken from them. Nice language.
Woo! Hey, that sounded like some totalitarian language.
Yeah. Mr. Martin said he considered that the separation from Great Britain placed the 13 states in a state of nature towards each other, that they could have remained in that state till this time but for the Confederation, that they entered into the Confederation on the footing of equality, that they met now to amend it on the same footing, and that he could never accede to a plan that would introduce an inequality and lay 10 states at the mercy of Virginia, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania. Those are the three
largest populated states.
Yeah. James Wilson comes in, says he could not admit the doctrine that when the colonies became independent of Great Britain, they became independent also of each other. He read the Declaration of Independence, observing thereon that the United Colonies were declared to be free and independent states. Okay, that's accurate. And inferring that they were independent, not individually, but unitedly, and that they were confederated as they were independent states. Kind of important points being made here today, huh? Mm-hmm. Fundamental to what our understanding of what the Constitution should be.
And understand that this discussion, really what the discussion is this. Do we become just like another country in Europe, or do we become something very unique, very different, where the states hang on to their voice?
We should have some music. Boom, boom, boom. Because Hamilton comes back in.
Or maybe just have a soundbite.
I'll see what I can do about that next week. Colonel Hamilton assented to the doctrine of Mr. Wilson. He denied the doctrine that the states were thrown into a state of nature. He was not yet prepared to admit the doctrine that the Confederacy could be dissolved by partial infractions of it. He admitted that the states met now on an equal footing, but could see no inference from that against concerting a change of the system in this particular. He took this occasion of observing, for the purpose of appeasing the fears of the small states, that two circumstances would render them secure under a national government, in which they might lose the equality of rank they now held. One was the local situation of the three largest states. They were separated from each other by distance of place, and equally so by all the peculiarities which distinguish the interest of one state from those of another. What he's saying is the big states, well, no combination therefore could be dreaded. He's saying that the big states, because they're geographically separated from each other, they're not going to join together and gang up on the small states. In the second place, as there was a gradation of the states from Virginia, the largest, down to Delaware, the smallest, it would always happen that ambitious combinations among a few states might and would be counteracted by defensive combinations of greater extent among the rest. Hamilton doesn't understand reality, apparently, and he's making some hyperbolic, I guess that's the right word, examples of why, why we need a national government is what he's trying to justify. He said, no combination has been seen among large counties merely as against lesser counties. The more close the union of the states and the more complete the authority of the whole, the less opportunity will be allowed the stronger states to injure the weaker. So his argument is, well, if we give the national government more power, taken away from the big states, we'll be protecting you little states, which is a very interesting argument.
Don't worry. You can trust us.
How's that worked out?
Wow.
All right.
Yeah, and it's funny because, Brady can attest to this. I have been someone who has been harsh about Hamilton from the first day anybody has ever met me. And I always get a kick out of when someone does a little study on Hamilton and then they come back to me and they go, dude, you weren't kidding. I can't count how many times that has happened. Our good friend Ron Partain being one of them. The more I study Hamilton, the more I dislike him. I knew that I had an ally in Brian McClanahan when he came out with a book about how Alexander Hamilton screwed up America.
This one right here.
Oh yeah, that one right there. Of course, my favorite book still to this day is Hamilton's Curse by De Lorenzo. Yep,
that's fantastic. Well, I've got that over there on the bookshelf.
Yeah, but and it's funny because people, we as a society, the left in particular, have celebrated Hamilton so much that you have people who typically would not fall into that ideological scheme say, oh, well, I love Hamilton. Well, why? Well, they only know it because that's all they've heard. Well, if it wasn't for Hamilton, our financial system would have never gotten off the ground, is one of the ones I hear a lot. And then when you start detailing who the man was, people go, well, I didn't know that. So just the reason why I bring this up is, there's a reason why the left made a play about him.
Yeah. Same reason the left celebrates Lincoln.
Yeah.
Remember, on the political scale, when you say right versus left, the way Doug and I describe it is far right is zero government, far left is totalitarian government. Lincoln and Hamilton were leftists. They wanted bigger government. And when you have more government, you have less individual liberty. That's the real sliding scale. Now, let's not get into our differences on where we are on the scale, because that's a long show and a long discussion. But
that would be another 2-hour segment on this program, and I'm sure everybody's ready to take a break until we come back for the next one.
Well, we got more to go today. We got some more time.
We're not quite done yet.
Yeah, we're only 51 minutes in. Let's do a start on the next day. See if we can power through a bit. Okay.
Power through. Well, it is quite literally a power through if there's more Rufus King and Hamilton involved here.
Yeah, it was a painful day. Okay. So we're going to go to June 20th.
Now, I want you guys to notice something. We're at about the 5th, 6th week right now, right?
Let's see where we are. Let's look at the calendar. We are probably in, I'll call it the fourth real week of everyday sessions.
All right. So we're getting to that point where the realization, we're getting real close to that moment where the realization is coming up that there ain't no fixing the articles. So let's just pay attention.
And Jefferson's letters aren't arriving yet. That's another.
Not quite. Not yet.
That's where the big shift is going to start.
Mm-hmm. And let me say something about that real quick. So,
tell them where Jefferson is right now.
Well, Jefferson is in France, and he is corresponding. Now he's receiving letters from the beginning of the convention. Now he's going to start, and then he responded to them. But it takes a couple months. It's going to take like 8 weeks for his letters to get there. But then they start coming in daily, and he's writing to Matthew Lyons. He's writing to James Madison. He's writing to a number of the delegates that are there. And the reason why this is important is A, Jefferson had a great influence on this convention. B, remember what I was saying, they all came in as nationalists. Now you've got this laissez-faire mind starting to put in his 2 cents, so to speak. And one of the main voices in this convention, and the not Mr. Constitution, but the Father Constitution, the one who wrote the framework, James Madison, is taking a lot of this information to heart. And
it's so important to note that Jefferson's in France, because some of the great thinkers of the time, of the true liberty, a lot of the ideas came from France.
Montesquieu being probably the most important.
Yeah, definitely on the Mount Rushmore of that category.
In fact, David Barton's Wall Builders did going through all of the documents, all the letters, all of the everything, and the 3 greatest influences. Number 1 being the Holy Bible, the second one being John Locke, but the third was Montesquieu, most mentioned by the founders.
All right. Well, that brings me up to one of my favorite little complaints about Jefferson is Locke's original, what he wrote, Life, Liberty, and Property. and Jefferson changed it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the reason I object to that is we kept property in there. This whole idea, this whole concept of stakeholder capitalism would have disappeared. Property rights had been enshrined in the Declaration, would have made our lives much easier today. So
perhaps I sort of agree with you, but I think the importance of pursuit of happiness is there. There's a good reason it's there also. So perhaps
all four. How about all four?
If we go back in time and have it rewritten, maybe life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness.
100%. I think we came to that agreement on that about 3 years ago after rigorous debate on the topic.
But anyway, to finish my point, so I remember back during the 2016 election, and Ben Carson made the comment how influential Jefferson was on the Constitutional Convention, and he was right. And the media went nuts on. Well, he wasn't even there; he was in France. And Ben Carson explained, no, he was writing, and none of that got to the mainstream media. Only a few smaller outlets picked up on what he said about Jefferson's influence. The ideology that opposes this Constitution hates Jefferson. And the idea that he had any influence, they want desperately to block that out. Understand, Jefferson's voice, even though he wasn't there, was very influential. Jefferson was probably one of the most influential voices of that time in America. He ranked right up there with, well, unfortunately, Hamilton. And you really did have this battle between these two ideas. But Jefferson was one of the most respected voices of the time. And absolutely, even though he wasn't there, he had influence. Go ahead.
All right. Blunt from North Carolina gets there. First proposal report of the committee of the whole, blah, blah, blah. Mr. Ellsworth. Where's Ellsworth from again? He is from Connecticut. Mr. Oliver Ellsworth. He moves to alter it so as to run that the government of the United States ought to consist of a supreme legislative, executive, and judiciary. It's just changing semantics. This alteration, he said, would drop the word national and retain the proper title, the United States. This is actually very important.
This is the response to that discussion about the states losing their sovereignty.
Mm-hmm. He could not admit the doctrine that a breach of any of the federal articles could dissolve the whole. So the thing to keep in mind here is this is the next day. This is a Wednesday after the debate that we just went through on the rights of the states. These guys went home afterwards, met at the tavern, and that's where a lot of the real discussion was happening. And Ellsworth comes in.
Meeting halls and churches. That's where those are the places they talked.
And Ellsworth comes in there, ready to go. He wants the podium right away. It would be highly dangerous not to consider the Confederation as still subsisting. He wished also.
I like that language, as still subsisting. There's a clue there that there's a push that it might not.
He wished also the plan of the convention to go forth as an amendment to the articles, since under this idea the authority of the legislatures could ratify it. If they are unwilling, the people will be so too.
Yeah, so in other words, while we can talk all we want here, we need to put it before the legislature before we make any decisions, to the people.
In other words, the states at this point in time are still the parents.
Mm-hmm.
If the plan goes forth to the people for ratification, several succeeding conventions within the states would be unavoidable. He did not like these conventions. They were better fitted to pull down than to build up constitutions. Interesting. Me, I personally love conventions. We should have more of them. Mr. Randolph of Virginia did not object to the change of expression, but appraised the gentleman who wished for it, that he did not admit it for the reasons assigned, particularly that of getting rid of a reference to the people for ratification. The motion of Mr. Ellsworth was acquiesced in nem. con. A second resolution that the national legislature ought to consist of two branches, taken up, the word national struck out, as of course. So Ellsworth's suggestion, we got national out of the legislature.
Right. Now you'll still find often these guys referring to it as a national government. and they're using it synonymously with federal. But what we're watching here is a movement away from that national idea and towards a federal idea.
One of the things I find really interesting here, Doug, if my screen gets back, is you look right here. It says national legislature. National is in lowercase, legislature is in uppercase.
Mm-hmm.
That matters in a lot of the way they use the language.
Yeah, remember, folks, often not only were proper nouns capitalized, but often they would use capitalization for emphasis.
Yeah, and that's how I've been criticized for writing like that in my emails, but it makes perfect. That's how I personally write.
I write that way often too, and people are confused by this. I can't help it, man. I've read the Founding Fathers so much they've rubbed off on me.
That may be where I got it from. I don't know. The other interesting thing is when I talk about states, I almost always capitalize states.
I capitalize states when I'm specifically about states. If it's a general reference to the group, then I won't capitalize it. But otherwise, yeah, I do the same thing.
So when you're writing states' rights, it's capital S, capital R.
That's absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, agreed. All right, Mr. Lansing, one of our favorites from New York. This is John Lansing Jr.
This is one of the gentlemen that will be departing once he realizes they're writing a new constitution.
And he's going to talk about that right now. I think we can get through his long paragraph, and that'll cover us for today.
Okay.
So Mr. Lansing observed that the true question here was whether the convention would adhere to or depart from the foundation of the present Confederacy. It's exactly what Doug just said. He goes, what are we doing here? And moved instead of the second resolution, that the powers of the legislation be vested in the United States of Congress. He had already assigned two reasons against such an innovation as was proposed: the want of competent powers in the convention, and two, the state of the public mind. So he's telling you, basically foreshadowing, that he's going to be objecting if this convention goes too far. He doesn't think they have these powers. They lack the power to do what they're doing, and he does not think the public will agree to it.
He kind of also sounds like particular groups today. Wait a second. This looks like a runaway convention.
This was a runaway convention. There's no doubt about it. It had been observed. When people talk about the runaway convention, I go, yeah, that's what they had in Philadelphia. It was a runaway convention. Guess what? It worked out pretty darn well. You know why? Because the thing they had in their mind, in the back of their mind the whole time is, well, we can't get too crazy because it'll never be ratified. And that's what prevents a runaway convention, the fact that you need 3/4 of the states to ratify an amendment.
And far be it me to normally congratulate Alexander Hamilton, but in Federalist Paper 85, that's what he explains when it comes to Article 5 conventions. That the fail-safe, he doesn't use that word, that's a modern term, but the fail-safe is that it still takes 3/4 of the states to ratify anything that would come out of such convention.
Well, that's why Hamilton's so infuriating, because there's three Hamiltons. There's Hamilton at this convention, where he's pushing for, basically an empire. And there's Hamilton in the
Federalist Papers,
which he's basically saying, no, this Constitution is great. It's not going to do that. This is what it really means. And I agree with almost everything Hamilton wrote there. And there's Hamilton the day the ink was dry, turning around and trying to implement a nationalist government. So there's three Hamiltons. That's why he's so duplicitous.
Right.
In the Federalist Papers, what Hamilton wrote, I agree with a lot of it. That's why we talk about, when you talk about the Constitution, is it the Constitution that was ratified or the Constitution that was then implemented? Because those are two different things.
Right.
And when Hamilton
and people ask me, I said, well, Doug, when did we start going off the tracks when it came to our Constitution? I said, before the ink was dry.
Yeah.
Day one.
I think I've only heard you say that about 100 times, and I've probably repeated about 50 or more.
Yeah.
All right. It had been observed by Mr. Madison in discussing the first point that in two states, the delegates to Congress were chosen by the people. Notwithstanding the first appearance of this remark, it had in fact no weight, as the delegates, however chosen, did not represent the people merely as so many individuals, but as forming a sovereign state. Mr. Randolph put it, he said, on its true footing, namely, that the public safety superseded the scruple arising from the review of our powers. Now that's an interesting statement because it touches on public safety. Now we start talking about emergency powers.
General welfare.
Yeah. It's where all governments give themselves more power if they can justify it because we're protecting you. Trust the experts. But in order to feel the force of this consideration, the same impression must be had of the public danger. He had not himself the same impression and could not therefore dismiss the scruple. Mr. Wilson contended that as a convention were only to recommend, they might recommend what they pleased. He deferred much from him. Any act whatsoever so respectful of a body must have a great effect, and if it does not succeed, will be a source of great dissensions. What he's saying there is, he's saying this convention is overstepping its bounds. You got to be careful what you guys release because we're such an august body and so respected. Our words are going to have, whether the country adapts what we recommend or not, it's going to have a profound impact.
Yeah, and what he was saying by only 2 of the states where the delegates were appointed by the people, what he was saying by that was that when choosing who to understand, all the states knew this convention was going on. And 2 of them, and remember 12 were present. Rhode Island began to send delegates, they went back. But only 2 of the states actually held conventions to choose who would be the delegates. The rest of them, the delegates were chosen by the state legislatures. That's what he's saying. Either way, though, he's saying the delegates, whether it was by the people or by the state legislatures, they're there representing the states, and the states are a part of a union and a confederacy, and that's what we, quote unquote, need to be hanging on to kind of attitude. But anyway, continue.
He admitted that there was no certain criterion of the public mind on the subject. He therefore recurred to the evidence of it given by the opposition in the states to the scheme of an impost. It could not be expected to those possessing sovereignty could ever voluntarily part with it. I love that point. And that's exactly what we were talking about earlier. The states were sovereign. They said, okay, we are going to delegate some powers, some enumerated powers to this new general government. And general government was the term eventually was adopted. And that's all we're giving them. The rest of it we retain. And that's what the 9th and 10th Amendment said. And by the way, the 14th Amendment did not override the 10th Amendment, no matter how 20th century courts decided to interpret it.
And he's also saying, the states have been sovereign all along. You don't just let go of sovereignty after having it. You don't just, this is something that you've possessed. It's a part of who you are. You don't just suddenly lose it.
No, nor would any of the 13 have agreed to that.
Right.
It was not to be expected from any one state, much less from 13. Exactly what I just said. I like Lansing today because he's agreeing with me. He proceeded to make some observations on the plan itself and the arguments urged in support of it. The point of representation could receive no elucidation from the case of England. The corruption of the boroughs did not proceed from their comparative smallness, but from the actual fewness of the inhabitants, some of them not having more than 1 or 2. It's a pretty good point. Cart before the horse, right? A great inequality existed in the counties of England. Yet, like the complaint of peculiar corruption in the small ones had not been made. It had been said that Congress represent the state prejudices. So is he making the point that there's less corruption the smaller the government is? Is that the comparison he's making? Is that what you read from that?
I think that's partly what he's saying. Yeah. Now that said, my argument has always been, if that were the case, how do you explain city councils? So,
well, yeah,
not that I'm disagreeing or agreeing with him, but just from my own observations.
Well, that was the argument. Yeah, the reverse argument was made from the ratification of the 17th Amendment. They said, well, you got all these state legislatures, they're corrupt and they're sending corrupt senators. So we'll just, take it away from the legislatures and make it a, democratically elected popular vote. and there won't be any more corruption. How'd that work out?
Yeah, democracy is a one-way road to corruption and socialism. Pure democracy. Well, we have some democracy. We have since the beginning House of Representatives. So there are some democratic principles in our system, but we are a republic. We are not a democracy. Continue.
Well, no, that's a really important point, because this is why semantics messes us up in these discussions all the time. A democracy is a form of government. You can have democratic principles in a republic.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't make you a democracy.
Right.
Because democratic is a verb. Adjective.
Now, if you throw some cheese on top of your broccoli, it doesn't make the broccoli cheese.
That's really good. And the third part, I got to throw this in there. There's no such thing as the Democratic Party. It is the Democrat Party. And it has nothing to do with democracy nor democratic principles.
I think it has a lot to do with democracy. I think they understand that pure democracy will give them what they want in the long run.
Well, they've gone well past that. What they call democracy is not democracy. It's worse. Will not any other body chosen by the legislatures or the people of the states also represent their prejudices? It had been asserted by the colleague, Hamilton, that there was no coincidence of interests among the large states that ought to excite fears of oppression in the smaller.
Now, I want to stop you for a second. Understand, he says, by his colleague, Colonel Hamilton. Understand, Lansing's from New York. So they're not just colleagues in the convention, they're colleagues from the same state. And so think about this for a second. John Lansing is not ignorant regarding who Hamilton is. If anything, he knows Hamilton probably better than just about everybody in that convention. He's dealt with the guy before. They're from the same state.
Yeah, and he knows who Hamilton's sponsors are.
Yeah, he knows that too. Yeah.
And that's a really key point about Hamilton is, Hamilton worked for moneyed interests. He's probably the first, corrupt politician we had. If it were true that such a uniformity of interests existed among the states, there was equal safety for all of them, whether the representation remained as heretofore or proportion as now proposed. It is proposed that the general legislature shall have a negative on the laws of the states. There's a big one here. Is it conceivable that there will be leisure for such a task? That there will be, on the most moderate calculation, be as many acts sent up from the states as there are days in the year? Yeah, the states have to ask for permission to Washington, D.C., or wasn't even D.C., to the national legislature for every single thing they do. Is that even close to being practical?
Much less does that anything close to maintaining their sovereignty.
Yeah. Will the members of the general legislature be competent judges? Meaning, why would a congressman from Massachusetts know what the heck needs to be done in South Carolina? These are different cultures, different economies.
And this is an argument that that mirrors Jefferson's laissez-faire localism arguments.
He just is next. I should have read the next sentence. Will a gentleman from Georgia be a judge of the expediency of a law which is to operate in New Hampshire?
Yeah, so you were pretty close, South Carolina, Massachusetts, Georgia, New Hampshire. That's a pretty close comparison.
It's New Hampshire, please. We've renamed it since I got here. Such a negative would be more injurious than that of Great Britain heretofore was. I love this point. I agree with it.
Mm-hmm.
Because some issues should be decided locally.
Right.
That's just a fact. And that's this whole monstrous behemoth of a federal government doing top-down decisions for the whole country. It's never made a bit of sense. And of course, he's going to get government waste. And he says he sees this already.
Yes, Washington, D.C. No, I'm from small town America. We're wanting to put up a stop sign on a road that you've never heard of. Do we have permission?
Great example.
And the federal officer says, "I need to put you on hold. I have 400 other calls on similar issues. Hold on."
Yeah, let me. We'll just pass it down in the inbox of one of thousands of DEI hire bureaucrats.
Yeah, don't worry. One of the mindless automatons in the bureaucracy will talk to you within the next 4 years.
Exactly. It's a really good example. I mean, this is so fundamental to this discussion. Some things need to be handled locally, and there's a few things that need to be handled on a grander scale. And that's what the enumeration doctrine was. Say, look, we do need a general government. We do need a national government for some things, but not others.
Well, and like I tell people, the federal government's role is what has to do with the union. Does it protect, preserve, and promote the union? If it doesn't, then it's a local issue and it belongs to states. If it protects, promotes, and preserves the union, then it needs to be a federal authority.
Yeah. It is said that the national government must have the influence arising from the grant of offices and honors in order to render such a government effectual to be believed, such an influence to be necessary. But if the states will not agree to it, it is in vain, worse than in vain, to make the proposition. Once again, they're never going to.
And I think that argument is not only legitimate, but I think that's part of the reason why Hamilton is wanting to dissolve the states. We'll never get our national government if they have to approve it. So let's get rid of them. If we get rid of them, we don't need their approval.
Unfortunately, you need their approval to get rid of them, which they won't do. And that's why you get the three sides of Hamilton.
Right.
He goes, okay, this is what I want. Okay, I'm not going to get it, so I'm going to argue to get you a little bit more than we have, and then I'll turn around and behind the scenes, try to implement it anyways. Anyway. All right. If this influence is to be attained, the states must be entirely abolished. Will anyone say this would ever be agreed to? The answer is hell no. He doubted whether any general government equally beneficial to all can be attained. That now under his consideration, he is sure, must be utterly unattainable. He had another objection. The system was too novel and complex. No man could foresee what its operation will be, either with respect to the general government or the state governments. One or the other, it has been surmised, must absorb the whole. That is one of the best paragraphs we have read. All right,
and when we come back next time, we get to hear what Colonel Mason had to say about it. Yeah, George Mason probably being the biggest star when it comes to, aside from maybe Jefferson, when it came to laissez-faire, and ultimately the man who would be essentially considered, may not have been officially, but the leader of the Anti-Federalist movement.
Yeah, George Mason is one of the great ones. And that's why I wanted to break there, so we could lead off next week with Mason to start us off with it.
Oh, see that's tough, man. It's like watching a baseball game and the leadoff hitter hits a home run. How do you follow up after that?
I had the pleasure of watching Ricky Henderson play a little bit.
There you go,
Ricky being Ricky.
Yeah,
this was a fun episode, Doug.
Yes, it was.
I almost
worth the wait.
Yeah, I almost think that once we can get back into routine, the holidays are going to get in the way and all that, but I'd like to start doing 2 or even 3 of these a week to really power through. I mean, I got a lot of comments. People, where the heck have you guys been?
Yeah.
And we need to get on a roll. And today was really good. We hit a lot of major points with some
very
major
important things. Yes. And this idea of the sovereignty of the states, I'm glad that we hammered on it the way we did, because it is so integral to what the American system is.
Agreed. Real quick, Doug. Last thing I want to say before I do that. Lansing is growing in my eyes as we go through these. I just appreciate everything he just said. That's he had a lot of foresight. And
Lansing and Robert Yates both.
Yeah, we'll get there. And it's strange for me to be, giving any kind of praise to a New Yorker. That never really happens.
You think it's hard for you to do that? Imagine someone from Boston. But anyway, all right. So,
Doug, real quick, where can everyone find you?
DouglasVGibbs.com. I am writing every day. Don't miss any of my articles. Don't miss any of them. And if you want to join my email list, because the email list link on that site is not working the way I want it to, so go to Navigation to Liberty. That's navigation, the number 2, liberty.com. Hit the join email link there. Also on that site is my list of books, my list of radio shows, and other programs that I do. And I'm working on getting back into doing videos. I plan to do them daily. Just a matter of getting all of my what's the right word? Ducks in a row. So we'll get there. And of course, you can always catch me on Saturdays. Saturday at 1 Pacific at KMET 1490 AM, and Saturdays at 8, both of these being Pacific time, on KCBQ, The Answer San Diego, and K-Praise, KPRZ. And that show, Mr. Constitution Hour, is also on all of the podcast platforms. Check it out. And lastly, help fund the movement. Become a partner. Become a partner to what I do. Hit the join link at douglasvgibbs.com or the join the movement link at navigationtoliberty.com. And for $9 a month, you help fund the effort. Thank you.
Yeah, everybody, this is the 17th episode we have done in the on Madison's Notes. It's going to be about 40 or 50 more. Please share this with friends that you're having these discussions with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just, my channel's growing. People are watching this stuff. This is the 49th version of the Re-Federalist. We may start doing these live. I'm going to talk to Doug about that soon on a regularly scheduled basis, but we'd like to build the audience because I think this information is so important to understanding what's going on with our government and basically how we can fix and get us back on the right track. These are fundamental principles about original intent of the Constitution, and we need to get back to it, people.
The founding fathers hammered home the point that only an informed public can maintain liberty. A virtuous and informed public. We need to be virtuous. We need to be informed. Here's where you become informed.
And that's why the more informed the public is, the less power the scoundrels that want to manipulate people will have. Everybody, you already know where to find me. You're probably watching this on my Rumble channel, war_hamster. Catch me on X at war_hamster1776. Until the next time, everybody, thanks for watching. Cheers.